In 2023, I found myself in a rough patch with my dad, so I decided to sublet a rental cabin for a few months. The actual tenant, who I'll call my landlord for simplicity, was dealing with his own issues and needed to leave, making the place available for me. This cabin was perfect for my temporary situation, as it was rented month to month. It had 2 floors, a small kitchen, a decent-sized living space, and 1 bedroom accessible by a short flight of stairs with a quirky hatch door. By the time this story starts, I had already been living there for a month and had just paid for my second month, so I was settled in. The cabin was at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by a few other similar cabins. One of them seemed vacant, as I never saw any cars or lights, and although I never met my other neighbors, I knew people lived in those houses. I worked 12-hour shifts, and on this particular night I was exhausted. I came home, made a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and a protein shake for a late dinner, and headed to bed. I always shut the hatch door at night because having it open made me feel exposed and vulnerable. Though the door didn't have a lock, it gave me some peace of mind. As I lay in bed watching TV, I suddenly heard a voice from downstairs, asking, "Who's up there?" My heart stopped, and I shot up in bed. The voice sounded like it was inside the house, but it could have been from outside. I turned off the TV and peered through the circular window above the bed but saw nothing. It was pitch dark outside. I called out, "Who's there?" but was met with silence. Hoping it was my dad, I called his name, but there was no response. I gathered my courage and opened the hatch door, looking down the stairs. I turned on the living room light, expecting to see no one. I checked outside, but there was no one in front of the house either. Confused and a bit relieved, I went back to my bedroom, shut the hatch door, and turned the TV back on. Not even 5 minutes later, I heard angry pounding on the bedroom door from below. This time, there was no doubt someone was inside the house. I froze, too scared to move. The door had no lock, and the intruder could easily come up. After what felt like an eternity, I finally moved, looking for my phone. It wasn't on my nightstand, and I realized I might have left it downstairs. I quietly opened the hatch door again, looking down into the living room. The flickering TV light gave me a bit of visibility. I crept down the stairs, and instead of turning on any lights, I bolted out the back door, barefoot. I ran to the nearest neighbor's house with lights on, knocking frantically. Someone peeked through the window but just stared at me without responding. It was unnerving. I started to back away, wondering if he might be involved in this strange situation. I decided to go back to my rental. The back door was still closed as I had left it. I locked it behind me and turned on every light in the house. I searched for my phone and finally found it in my car's center console. With my phone in hand, I went back inside. As I climbed the stairs, I saw someone sitting on my bed, staring at the TV. I screamed, and the man slowly turned his head to look at me. Panicking, I ran back downstairs and outside, dialing 911 from my locked car. I watched the house from my car, telling the operator everything. I saw someone walk past the backyard into the woods just as the police arrived. The officer checked the house and confirmed no one was inside. He asked if I had another place to stay, so I swallowed my pride and returned to my dad's house for the night after packing some essentials. The next day, I went back to the cabin, stayed one more night, and then packed up the rest of my stuff. The landlord agreed to refund some of my money, but his lack of questions about the intruder was suspicious. Between the creepy neighbor, the landlord's sudden need to move out, and the intruder, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Maybe it was all connected, or maybe I was just overthinking it. It was a Tuesday night around 11 p.m. in 2013, and I was walking down a dimly lit street on my way home from work. My car was in the shop, so I had to walk 3 miles home every day. It wasn't a big deal since it only took about an hour, and I was always home before midnight. I lived in a small town in southern Indiana, where after 10 p.m., you rarely see any cars except for the occasional trucker heading to Indianapolis. That night, I was about a mile into my walk when I turned onto a dirt road. My house was off the beaten path, so I had to take several dirt roads surrounded by dense forest to get there. As I made the turn, I heard the sound of an engine in the distance, getting closer very slowly. I looked back and saw a van moving down the road I had just left. At first, the van didn't have its lights on, which didn't seem too strange since there was a cheap car dealership in town that sold used vehicles with all sorts of problems, like broken headlights. I assumed this van belonged to someone who had bought one of those cars. I kept walking, but I could still hear the van slowly moving behind me. Suddenly, the van's engine roared, and it sped up, turning on its lights. I was startled but not yet worried. However, when the van got about 500 feet away from the turn to the dirt road, it turned off its lights again and slowed down. Now I was officially creeped out. I tried not to appear scared, so I picked up my pace and kept walking. I kept glancing back to see if the van was following me. My heart sank when I saw the van turn onto the dirt road. It was now only about 500 feet behind me, so I started walking even faster. Against my better judgment, I looked back again and saw the van had stopped, and both the passenger and driver's doors were open. Panic set in, and I began to run for my life down the dirt road. As I ran, I heard what I was sure was a gunshot. Fear gripped me as I thought this might be the end. I made a quick decision to turn into the surrounding forest, hiding behind a large rock. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard a man's voice not far away say, "I think she went into the woods." To my horror, I heard the voices of what sounded like 3 young girls responding, "Okay, sir, we'll see if we can find her." I wasn't just fearing for my life now. I was terrified that I might be forced into whatever sick group this was. I covered my mouth, trying to stay silent. Then I heard the man say, "Whoever finds her doesn't have to drink the blood tonight." My mind raced. Was this some sort of satanic cult? Were these girls kidnapped? Would I become one of them? I stayed behind that rock for what felt like an eternity, jumping at every sound. Then, to my relief, I heard police sirens nearby. I stayed put until I felt it was safe to move. When I peeked out from behind the rock, I saw red and blue lights flashing just outside the forest. I ran out, screaming for help. The police came to me, and one of them asked, "Ma'am, do you know about this body?" I was confused and asked, "What body?" Then I saw it. The most gruesome sight I've ever seen. In front of the police car was a naked young woman, gutted with blood everywhere. There was no van in sight. Shaken, I explained everything to the cops: the van, the man, the girls, and the disturbing talk about drinking blood. They assured me they would investigate and were kind enough to drive me home that night. Once home, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking out my window, and to my horror, I saw the same van driving slowly down my street without its lights on. This time, I quickly wrote down the license plate number and called the cops. When they arrived, the van was gone. The officers later told me something that still chills me to this day. They said, "We checked the license plate number. It's registered in South Dakota." But here's the strange part. We've had reports tonight of a suspicious van with the same license plate number in Vermont, Nevada, Alaska, and Texas. They promised to keep me informed, but I never heard back from them. I don't believe in the paranormal, so I think it was some sort of cult using fake license plates to carry out their sick activities across the country. But I guess I'll never know for sure. I moved out of Indiana, and now whenever I see something suspicious, I don't take any chances, I run. My wife, Gianna, and I live in a normal suburb. We have normal jobs, normal lives, and normal neighbors. We live the standard American lifestyle that most of us are taught by our parents to achieve. The fact that I'm sitting down to write this story is already saying something because I'm not a writer. The last time I typed something out this long was the last paper I wrote in college. But something happened not that long ago that no one can explain, and it still scares us to this day. One evening, after a typical day at work, Gianna and I decided to go out for dinner. We got back around 9 p.m. Since we don't stay up late on work nights, by 9:30 p.m., we were brushing our teeth and getting ready for bed. By 10 p.m., we were in bed, usually shutting the lights off at 11 p.m. after reading our books or watching our show. That night, we were watching our show when the phone rang. Gianna told me not to answer it, saying anyone calling at this hour can't be good news. I agreed but thought I should pick it up in case it was an emergency. As I reached for the phone next to the bed, it stopped ringing before I could lift the receiver. Our old landline was terrible. The caller ID disappeared the second the call ended, and there was no way to check call history. I shrugged it off as a wrong number. A few minutes later, the phone rang again. I grabbed it and saw the screen said, "Unknown number." Gianna and I both thought it was strange, especially since it was past 10 p.m. There's a generally accepted cutoff time for phone calls, and it's after 9 p.m. I didn't pick up the phone, but right after it stopped ringing, it rang again. This time, it felt urgent, like something might have happened to a relative, so I picked up in a hurry. On the other end, I heard the voice of my neighbor, Al. He asked if I knew about the man standing out in front of my house. I was confused and asked what he was talking about. He told me to go outside and hung up abruptly. Gianna's face showed fear when I told her what I said. She urged me not to go out there. I said I would just look out the window. I went downstairs and moved the curtain slightly to peek outside. There was definitely no one standing in our front yard. I opened the front door, then the storm door, and stepped onto the front stoop. I looked around, even checked the bushes, but there was nobody. Feeling a mix of annoyance and confusion, I went back to bed and told Gianna that no one was out there. We both found it odd since Al wasn't the type to play pranks, especially late on a work night. Gianna suggested I call Al back, so I did. The call went straight to voicemail, so I left a message asking what was going on and to call me back. Almost immediately after, the phone rang again. It was another unknown caller. I picked up, and it was Al again, saying in a calm, slow voice, "Go outside. There's someone standing outside your house." Then he hung up before I could say anything. I got up, feeling a mixture of irritation and fear, and said out loud, "What the hell is going on?" I told Gianna to wait while I checked the window again. This time, when I looked through the curtain, I saw someone standing at the end of our walkway where it met the sidewalk. The person had a hood pulled over their head, obscuring their face in shadow. My heart pounded as I opened the door and called out, "Can I help you?" The figure just stood there, unmoving. I threatened to call the police. As I did, the phone rang again. I closed the door and went to the kitchen to answer it. This time, the caller ID showed Al's number. I picked up, and Al's voice sounded much more normal as he asked about my voicemail. He insisted he hadn't called me. Confused and a bit scared, I explained that someone had called twice, pretending to be him, and warned me about a man outside. Al was just as confused and insisted he hadn't seen anyone outside. I went back to the window, but the hooded figure was gone. Frustrated and uneasy, I demanded to know if Al was messing with me. He swore he wasn't and even put his wife on the phone to confirm he had been inside all night. I put the call on speaker so Gianna could vouch that we did receive those calls. Al did the same, and his wife confirmed that he hadn't made any calls. Eventually, we ended the call, but I was no less horrified than before. I had to go back downstairs to hang up the phone, and I took one last look outside. The man was gone, and none of us could ever explain what had happened. That night left us shaken. We never figured out who made those calls or who the mysterious figure was. To this day, we still talk about that eerie night and wonder what really happened. It's a mystery that continues to haunt us, making us question the safety of our normal, suburban life.